Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us and welcome to PAVE's 86th panel conversation. During the month of May, we are looking at AVs in the public good and how this technology can be used to help communities. And we are super excited to welcome our two panelists today. Kandace Cooks, who is the Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Lead at Nuro, and Councilmember Edward Pollard with the Houston City Council. Thank you both so much for joining us today and for talking about the great work that you're doing in Houston.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us.
We're so excited for this conversation. We got some great questions from the audience that we'll try to work in. Kandace, I would like to start with you, and I'm hoping you can both tell us what Nuro does. And then secondly, I love your title, the Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Lead. And if you could just talk a bit about what that role is and how it fits into Nuro's mission.
Sure thing. So Nuro is a robotics company, and we have more than 1,100 employees with operations in Texas, California, Nevada, and Arizona. And our mission is to better everyday life through robotics. So we're currently building zero-occupant autonomous vehicles for local deliveries. And in Houston, we've already delivered groceries, prescriptions, hot food. And we've been doing that since 2019 in partnership with cool companies like Domino's, Kroger, and CVS. We've also had the privilege of working with the Houston Food Bank. And to date, I think we've made more than 700 deliveries. So it's pretty cool to see how AV is enabling various sectors of both the local community in Houston and being able to service communities that don't traditionally have access to fresh food. That said, my role as Diversity, Inclusion, and Belonging Lead is pretty integral to almost every facet of the company. And I have the privilege of being able to serve as sort of an in-house consultant in many regards around our product, around our marketing, around our people systems, around the way we hire. There are lots of things that I lean into that aren't necessarily just employee focused or employee facing. And so we are working to not only build a team that is as diverse as the communities we serve, but we also spend a considerable amount of time coaching our team and living out the practice of being good corporate citizens. And that means taking into consideration how diverse the world around us is.
For sure. Fantastic. Thank you so much. And Councilmember Pollard, we've talked to a lot of cities who are approaching AV technology in different ways. And I'm hoping you can both talk a little bit about the big picture of transportation in Houston, kind of what the existing system is and how you're approaching the introduction of AV technology into the city.
Well, thank you for having me again. Nuro is actually doing a great job of really introducing AV to Houston. Their Houston office is within my district, which is Southwest Houston. And so I've had an opportunity to go by their headquarters and kind of look at the technology, look at some of the software and innovation that they're bringing to the forefront. But it's really all about connectivity and making sure that people have access to all types of different amenities and items. And when we think about AV from a city perspective, it's really more about education because it's so new. And so we as a city are trying to work with companies such as Nuro to figure out, how do we coexist with autonomous vehicles, right? What policy needs to be driven? What type of regulations need to be in place? What type of innovation measures do we need to look at? And then specifically looking at our infrastructure. How does our infrastructure actually make sure that these companies can be efficient and that we actually have the safe and necessary infrastructure for them to even exist? And so those are the type of conversations that are ongoing right now. Houston is very unique because we're vast, right? It's 650 square miles.
Wow.
And, we have people coming in every single day. So we're getting more and more congested. So we have to figure out ways in which we can make items accessible to people without always having to go through the traditional means of getting in your car and you going yourself. right? And then in some areas that are don't have as many amenities or services as others, how can we make sure that they have the goods that they need and that are accessible within their own community? And so those are the conversations that we're having right now. Nuro plays a big part in that. Even a few years ago, just seeing the Nuro cars on the street, right? And for the community to say, what is that? What are they doing? And starting to wrap their minds around this new concept is something that I think people are excited about. But at the same time, people are also wondering, how is this going to impact my quality of life, right?
Sure.
So those are all the ongoing conversations that we're having. But the great thing is that the city is really behind using technology, really behind being creative and innovative in our approach. And AV is going to go a long ways towards that as well.
Absolutely. And one of the cool things that you all have been doing is kind of the whole purpose of what we were really wanting to focus on in this panel is how you're taking this technology to really meet the needs or unmet needs in the community. And wanted to talk a little bit about the Food Insecurity Board. Councilmember, I know your leadership helped to push through the establishment of the Food Insecurity Board. I'm just wondering if you can kind of talk about the issue of food insecurity in Houston, sort of what the issue is and how the board is helping to tackle that problem.
Yeah, so food insecurity is basically when a certain area or community does not have access to quality or healthy foods, right? Mm-hmm. So it's some of the things we may take for granted. We may have a quality grocery store down the street from our house that we can get to on an everyday basis, but everyone is not fortunate enough to have that. They're just like there are banking deserts, there are food deserts. There are communities within the city of Houston that do not have a quality grocery store in close proximity to their home. And then you tie in the transportation piece that a lot of communities of color or low income communities don't have access to a vehicle. So they aren't able just to hop in their car and go to the grocery store. They may rely on public transportation. If you rely on public transportation, and that's one of the means in which you have to get groceries, then think about having to go and get on a bus, right? Take that bus to a grocery store in a different area of town, get all your groceries, have to lug them back on the bus and take them all the way back to wherever you reside. Many people aren't going to do that. So in the areas that have food deserts, they're either going to have like corner stores or they're going to have fast food. And that's really going to be their only options. And because of those are their only options, they don't have a lot of healthy choices. And when you don't have a lot of healthy choices, then that means that you're food insecure, right? And so we want to bring more food security to more places. Mm-hmm. And the way in which we see AV playing a role is because it's another means to be able to bring access to food and different items to those communities. And so finding creative ways in which we can work with local grocers, as well as the different entities in which Nuro has relationships with, to see how can we bring access to those who traditionally have not had access.
For sure. And Kandace, I'm curious if you can just expand on that a little bit. You serve on the Food Insecurity Board, and wondered if you can both share your experience on the board and also how Nuro is helping to address the issue.
Yeah, so as a native Houstonian, it's an honor and a privilege to even serve in this seat. And having been a food insecure household, it is critical to really take the time as a board and consider like, who are the people that we are hoping to support? How can we partner with existing nonprofits and faith-based organizations and other entities that are already enabling food services to underserved communities? And how can we thoughtfully bring in sort of like the business community and other willing volunteers to support and strategically uplift and help mitigate food insecure households across Houston. And so we spend our time sort of applying a strategy that allows us to further enable the efforts that are already happening across the city. It's interesting, and I think one of the things that's top of mind right now for us is all of the people. There's a burgeoning sector of humanity that is going to work every day. And after they pay their bills, they don't have enough money to purchase groceries or food. And it's thinking about those communities where there's not a whole lot of research, but the research that we do have available, we're leveraging to be able to ensure that we aren't missing those who are also traditionally missed when underserved opportunities and resources are made available. And so being on the food insecurity board is exciting, both personally, given my background, and also as a Nuro employee, because there's a direct connection and understanding or through line into how we bring autonomous vehicles into the very communities that we're talking about on this food insecurity board, and being able to effectively service those communities based on some really cool technology that we're working hard to figure out how to enable around the country. So it's super cool.
That's amazing. And Councilmember Pollard, I'm curious, and obviously Nuro is doing fantastic work. Are there other ways that autonomous technology can help with the issue that the Food Insecurity Board is looking at?
Well, I think just having them at the table and their voice as a part of the Food Insecurity Board goes a long ways. When you think about AV, Nuro is at the forefront of it, right?
Sure.
So whenever the discussions are what can happen or what are some creative ideas in which we can maybe collaborate or help in that space, then their voice needs to be a part of that discussion. When it comes to policymakers and even some other food experts, whether it's the food bank or some nonprofit, they may have a traditional mindset of how to bring access to quality food to communities. When it comes to AV, Nuro is at the forefront of those conversations and that technology and that software. So we need their viewpoint to even be able to expand our perspective on what's even possible, right? Because for many people, they haven't even grasped the concept of AV yet. So just being able to have them there, making sure that they're a power player in those conversations goes a long ways, not only towards addressing the issue, but really advising people like myself as a policymaker and a lawmaker on what are the things you think we can do from a policy or regulation standpoint to change ordinances or to bring forth an ordinance that will strengthen what we can do with AV.
I think your point's exactly right. And that, when you kind of talk about how all the different pieces you need to think about all the regulations that need to change, and there's so much involved in this puzzle. And then Kandace, in addition to the Food Insecurity Board, Nuro has also teamed with Houston Metro, the public transit agency, on a pilot to serve paratransit customers. And I'm curious if you can tell us a bit about that, how it works and what the goal is.
Yeah, and partnering with Metro Lift, they have more than 200,000 paratransit customers. And initially we were a bit hesitant because we didn't know how they would respond to such new technology. And so we surveyed interest among that customer base, and 40% of the group was actually interested in piloting a free grocery service or free grocery delivery in the Houston area. And so we have successfully run that pilot and concluded it. And the cool part about that is the findings will be published in Texas A&M's Texas Transit Institute. Mm-hmm. In the coming months. And so everyone will be able to consume that data and that research on the things that we discovered, and both around AV and how to enable that for paratransit customers, or better enable it for paratransit customers, as well as like what a vast community like the city of Houston, how that plays a factor into our AV's ability to both connect with people, depending on like, are there sidewalks, are there stairs, and like all of these different nuances that come into play when we're trying to sort of close the gap between food access and transit. And so it's incredible to see, but looking forward to sharing that information with the public and continuing to iterate on our AVs so that we can be a full service organization for all communities.
Fantastic. And Councilmember Pollard, we hear frequently from public sector entities who want to prepare for these new technologies and kind of say, we don't even know where to begin. And we get questions like, what infrastructure issues do you need to think about? How do you train police officers to deal with the technology? Curious how Houston has approached this.
So one of the things that we do with Nuro is really try to work in collaboration with them on, do we even have the necessary infrastructure to really ensure that these vehicles are able to coexist within our normal society, right? I mean, the streets in Houston aren't the best, right? And Nuro does a good job of really tracking their routes, being able to understand what's a possibility and what's not. But from a public safety standpoint, even when you think about police officers, understanding how fast can these cars go, right? What happens if there's some type of shortage and a car gets stalled, or there's an accident, or someone doesn't know how to maneuver around one, or all these questions are what cities like Houston are asking, and working with Nuro and other AV companies on, okay, when we're thinking about the future, and we're thinking about how do we make sure that these vehicles are something that's safe for the public, but also ways in which our city can thrive. Those are the specific questions that are on all of our minds regarding how these cars are going to impact lives on a daily basis. And many of the questions may actually be on a trial and error type of basis, because it's from an educational standpoint. Mm-hmm. It's never been done before to this degree. So a lot of things are in pilot phase, a lot of things are in testing phase, a lot of things are in experimental phase. And I think working through those components through the different pilots, understanding what can happen and what can't happen, and then really educating our different departments, from a planning department, from the police department, and then educating our community on what the expectations are when it comes to AV as well is going to be key.
That makes a lot of sense. And Kandace, what are the next steps for Nuro? Do you see the pilot becoming permanent? Is it scalable? Curious where you go next.
Yeah, so we'll definitely continue to pilot, incorporate all of that feedback into like our AVs and the data and research that we're able to gather during these pilots. That's important, and it informs the way we continue to roll out newer model AVs and fine tune our products so that when these autonomous vehicles are actually on the road, full stop, that they are, number one, as safe as possible. And secondly, are able to be a value add to communities and not a hindrance to communities. And so because we're solving some really, 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 really tough autonomy issues or challenges as a company. And we're really out, like as a council member said, we're out front here solving for these things. This work is going to continue to iterate, and in the future, it definitely will be more than a pilot, but we want to prioritize safety before we make that full-blown commitment to putting AVs on the road. The other thing that is cool and sort of next up for Nuro is, in addition to building a product that the community can rely on, we also are building a workforce that is local and part of Houston's footprint. And we just recently partnered with San Jacinto College, because in all of our research and all of our sort of building these AVs over the last few years, we've learned that coders have a unique skill set that does not translate to auto mechanics. We know that auto mechanics have a unique skill set that does not translate to coding. And so we're trying to carve out an upskilling pathway somewhere in between those two. And partnering with San Jac is enabling us to do that. And these programs actually don't require 4 years. All of them are 2 years or less. Because this is a future of work, we thought it was critically important to become part of the educational process in order to build skilled citizens who are able to actually step into this work and be able to roll it out and fill these jobs in ways that aren't currently available. So super excited to have San Jacinto College on board and looking forward to all of the many people who will now be able to sign up for that program.
I think the new jobs is such a critical piece of it too. We get a lot of questions about that also. And council member, I'm curious, you kind of made reference to this earlier, but how the vehicles have been accepted by Houston residents. Have there been problems integrating them into the city, or overall, how has the
So far, I think the experience has been good. There hasn't been any incidents that I can recall that have made people leery of having the autonomous vehicles on the road. I think people are more excited about having them. To piggyback off what Kandace was speaking about, I think one of the biggest challenges, especially as a city, is we think about the workforce, right? And finding ways in which we can truly educate the residents and our constituents on how this should create jobs, right? And then with the different companies that partner with Nuro, that maybe traditional delivery drivers will now be able to do more with inventory or storage or packaging, right? You're always going to hear the drawback whenever there's innovation when it comes to robotics or autonomous vehicles. On okay, what happens to those who lean on being a delivery driver or something in that realm as a means for resources or income? And so what we have to do is be able to showcase all of the different employment opportunities that can come about from having autonomous vehicles. How can this be, like she said, an added asset? And then when it comes to just the traditional way in which we do business from a delivery standpoint, how can we translate some of the traditional jobs to non-traditional jobs that will incorporate autonomous vehicles, right? And so that's always going to be a big question that we always want to work through. And that's where the education piece comes in. And so when it comes to getting community feedback, and when we get out there in front of different homeowners associations or civic clubs, and when we talk about the added benefits of having these vehicles on your street and being able to come to your neighborhood, of course, the number one question is going to be about jobs. And we have to be able to educate the constituents on how this is a positive and a step forward, and to really think outside the box and be creative about the future, rather than just think about the traditional ways in which we do things, but how this can be a way in which we can be more efficient and at the same time bring high quality jobs to those in need.
For sure. And Kandace, I'm curious, I don't want to put you on the spot, or but you mentioned coders or like auto techs. Can you just give us a sense of kind of some of the other like types of jobs that Nuro is needing in Houston?
Yeah, for sure. We have vehicle operators. We have like so many roles that actually are mechanics and or service the AVs in some regard. We also have a few other specialty roles that are available depending on both local needs and sort of like team sizes as we continue to grow as a company. And so I think if folks check out nuro.ai/careers, they'll be able to filter by all of the roles that are actually available in Houston.
Awesome. Yeah, it's just interesting to think of all the different, the jobs that these technologies create. Then we also get questions about timing and when to, I know you said safety is number one, but when you see Nuro's programs moving to other communities, and then also what steps would you, or what advice would you give to communities who want to prepare for the new technologies? What are the important things for them to be thinking about?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I think something that's absolutely critical is one, building and investing in a great relationship with local leaders and city officials. It would be incredibly difficult to do any of the work that we're doing without our partners at the City of Houston, like Mayor Sylvester Turner and Council Member Pollard, and so many other people who are working day to day with Nuro to ensure from on both a regulatory and education and community facing standpoints that we're able to enable autonomous vehicles on Houston roads and do our research and launch pilots and all the other things that we do on a day-to-day basis. That is the most key element of being able to build a program or replicate work like this in other cities. In addition to sort of like building that healthy relationship with a local leadership, you'll also want to think deeply and critically about who and when you're looking to service, because oftentimes that informs the way you build out a program. It's cool to think that you want something like this to happen overnight, but this is going to be a years-long investment. And this is the future of city operations or community operations. And so you want to think about like that runway, that timeline that it will be required in order to be able to build something that's not only cool sounding or maybe cool looking, but sustainable over time in an existing city, right?
Yep.
So super cool that people are thinking about this, but definitely work hand in hand with city leadership in order for this to be possible.
A lot of sense. And Councilmember, one last question. You've made references several times to education, and at PAVE, that's exactly what our purpose is to educate. And I'm curious what your experience has been. What have been the things that have been most valuable in terms of educating the community? Like what kind of things have you done to try to spread knowledge about what you're doing there?
So one of the things we did, like I said, is we went and took a tour of the Nuro office.
Yep.
And was able to really bring back a lot of information to the community. We put it out on social media. We did it on different platforms in our newsletter about what the expectations are, what to maybe look out for, what's maybe in your backyard, what are the pilot programs look like. And then, you know, as we think forward from a city standpoint, eventually it's going to probably get to the point where cities have autonomous vehicles. Mm-hmm. And, you know, local governments have autonomous vehicles. And it's going to be based on a lot of the work with companies like Nuro and what they were able to accomplish first to be able to show what's possible. And as we try to be more efficient with your tax dollars, and we find ways in which we can bring services in a quality way that may be different than how we've traditionally done it, then you're going to start to see government start to take place in putting forth measures to have autonomous vehicles, just like we're doing things with climate change and electric vehicles in that vein as well. And so we're going to always be collaborating with companies such as Nuro and others that are in the AV space in ways in which we can all collaborate, because this is the future and we have to be ready and prepared for it.
Fantastic. Well, we are sadly at the end of our time, but thank you both, Kandace Cooks and Councilmember Pollard, that's hard to say, for your time today and for a great conversation, and congratulations to the amazing work that you're doing together in Houston. And thank you to our audience for joining us. And you can get more information at our website, pavecampaign.org. Thank you all.
Thank you.